So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second round of our parent training series. My name is Lorraine Zanata. I'm from Boston Public Schools, and I'm one of the program directors for ABA. And this is Lindsay. She's with Boston Medical Center. And tonight I'm going to be presenting on problem behaviors and how to decrease them. And then Lindsay will provide us with a lot of community resources that are very helpful to families. Decreasing problem behaviors, it's a topic that is probably number one for most families with children with disabilities. And we'll start by asking the main question of why does he do that? So part of today's presentation is going to be understanding why people engage in certain problem behaviors. So in applied behavior analysis, or ABA as we call it, all behavior is viewed as serving a function. So there are four main functions that we'll go into, but basically when you're looking at a behavior that someone is engaging in, whether it's positive or a negative behavior, you should always look at it through the eyes as what is that behavior gaining that person? So understanding why a behavior occurs is accomplished through an analysis of the behaviors and the interaction with the environment. As behavior analysts, we always look to the environment to see the cause of the behavior. So again, going back to the question, why does he do that? Because it works for him. And it's become an effective way to get something that they want or to avoid something that they don't want. And again, we'll go into more detail in that a little bit later. But basically, in order to change behavior, especially problem behavior, we need to change our own behavior in order to change our children's behavior. So we have to learn how to look at the environment, we have to learn how to assess behavior, and that will get us on the road to being able to better understand and change. So we start off by looking at contingencies. And so basically we have an if-then rule. A contingency is a relationship between behavior and a consequence. And if you put your shoes on, then you get to go outside. And so basically you're gaining access to something. If you pick up the baby, then she stops crying, and that's a termination of an aversive event. So we always look at the contingency to see what is maintaining the behavior. And as behavior analysts, one thing that we do, it's a very data-driven science. And so we start off by defining the behavior. It's very important to be clear on what specifically the behavior looks like, because when you have multiple people working on a team, we have to make sure that everybody has the same understanding of what the behavior is. Especially when it comes to things like aggression or self-injurious behavior, it has to be a clean-cut definition. So behavioral definitions are statements that specify exactly what the behavior is. It emphasizes what the child or adult is doing. And we're going to take a second here and try and define some problem behaviors. So does anybody have a specific behavior in general that they're dealing with at home? No?
Mine is like my son likes to destroy things.
Okay. So if we were to look at destroying things, or what we call property destruction, you know, that's very vague. It can look very different for different children. So in this case, if we were making a data sheet to track your son's property destruction, then we'd have to specifically define what it is. So give us some examples about what the destroying looks like.
He can rip out pages of the book that he likes.
Okay.
Or he can get a tape that he likes to watch and just force to destroy the tapes.
Mm-hmm.
And puzzle that he likes to play and
Break the pieces.
break the piece like.
Okay.
And then he throw in the trash, and later he wants that back. He said, "We don't have it. You already destroyed."
Okay.
So it looks like has a block in there that he cannot understand.
Mm-hmm. Now, is it related to items that he's like working with or playing with, or does he destroy like anything in sight?
No.
Well, sometimes he'll go for something to destroy it that's been there for months at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden he'll have this conviction that he wants to take it down and destroy it. Pictures.
Okay.
Like something that he'll take right off the refrigerator, it's been on there for quite a long time, and something compels him to just take it off and destroy it.
Okay. So,
It's really not bothering him, you know?
so it sounds like property destruction for him, if we just look at specifically what the behavior is taking items and tearing them or breaking them apart, and that's what we would look at. So if someone were coming to work with him and had a data sheet, we would have property destruction defining or breaking, items. So if he just like basically knocked things over, we wouldn't call that property destruction, because for him, property destruction is tearing or breaking items. So again, we look at things very clearly. For example, for something like head banging, it sounds pretty obvious of what it is, but it looks different for different kids. And so we would define head banging as, banging the front of a head on a hard surface. Or some kids bang the back of their head on a wall only. So we'd want to make sure that we define the behavior clearly. So again, for data tracking purposes, if someone is working with the kid and they go like this, we say, well, that's not head banging. Head banging is the front of the head on a hard surface. We would say the floor or the wall or a table. Would be very clear. So that's kind of step one, is when you're deciding to track some behaviors. You would make a list of the behaviors and then really clarify what they're doing. The best way to do that is by watching the child and see what exactly they do. So really try to clarify what the behavior looks like. And typically we have a separate sheet that we keep that has the definitions of the target behaviors, or it might be on the back of the data sheet. Any other behaviors that people want to try and define, or?
Well, my son will make inappropriate verbal statements, and sometimes, he's 12, and sometimes it's just, inappropriate language.
Okay.
And, he's not hearing that at home, so you wonder where he is, any course he puts together correctly, as far as the foul language.
Yeah, yeah. So again, that's something that inappropriate verbal statements, it's kind of vague, and so we'd want to make sure if we were tracking that, what we would define, is it specific phrases or curse words that he's saying, or are we looking at anything that's off topic, socially that would be deemed inappropriate? As long as we defined it, we can then clearly track it. So, if we define it as, these particular curse words or these, off-taste comments, and then he says something just a little weird, we wouldn't want to track that as an inappropriate comment. So, hi there.
Now, when you say tracking it, you think you should compile the data and see when it actually occurs and what the triggers are? Is that what
Definitely. This is the process that we're going to be discussing tonight. So when we're looking at understanding and decreasing problem behavior, the first thing we do is we identify what the problem behaviors are, and then we define them clearly. So we're kind of at like step 2 right now. And then we'll continue to go on and discuss. So you guys okay? Did you want me to back up a little, or? Okay. We have some handouts here.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Lindsay. Okay, so first we define the behavior. The second step is to identify the function of the behavior. So this is kind of where the assessment or the analysis part starts, and we do this by taking data. So we have our data sheet that's made. If you look in the back of your packet, you'll see the last page is typically a data sheet that we use to track the function of behavior. It's called an ABC data sheet. The behaviors would be listed here. On the back of that, we would have the definitions of the behaviors. So then again, if a teacher or a teacher assistant or mom or the babysitter or the care worker that comes in home, everybody should be on the same page as far as understanding what the definition of the target behavior is. So when we start looking at identifying the function of the behavior, we do something called an ABC analysis. Okay. The ABC analysis is kind of the crux of behavior analysis for assessing, and the A stands for antecedent. It's anything that happens specifically right before the behavior. Typically we say like 3 to 5 seconds before the behavior. The B stands for behavior, and so again, that's what the person is doing. That's why we spend some time observing the behavior and defining the behavior. And then the C stands for consequence. It's what happens after the behavior. So anything that immediately follows the behavior is a consequence, and that can affect the behavior. So all behavioral procedures involve a manipulation of one or more of the components of this three-term contingency, the antecedent, the behavior, or the consequence. And so by modifying antecedents or consequences, that's how we see changes in behavior. Okay, so a little bit more instruction on antecedents. Again, when we give someone an ABC data sheet to fill out as far as tracking behavior, we do ask that you look at exactly what happened right before the behavior. So sometimes people say, well, he was doing nothing, or 10 minutes ago I walked out of the room. 10 minutes is way too much in advance to determine what might have happened. Again, we look at 3 to 5 seconds, probably 10 seconds max about what happened immediately before the behavior. So things that can happen before behaviors are verbal directives or instructions, changes in the environment, the presence or absence of people coming in or leaving a room, and just the passage of time. Going on, we look at behavior, and so behavior is basically anything that a person does, anything that we can observe. Behavior analysis is based on observing and measuring behavior. So it has to be things that we can currently see. So very concrete examples are writing numbers, or hitting, or running, or matching letters. Those are things that we can define and then count. Okay, consequence. Thank you for your handout. Oh, yeah, of course. Hi there.
Hello, how are you?
Consequences are events that follow a behavior in time. So again, anything that occurs immediately after the behavior, and again, we're specifically looking at that 3 to 5 seconds, not something that happened 10 minutes after the behavior. Behavior is very responsive to the environment. So again, we look at immediately before and immediately after. So consequences can affect behavior in 3 ways. They can increase the behavior. So the behavior occurs, a consequence occurs after that. It can cause the behavior to increase. It can cause the behavior to decrease, or it can have no change in the rate of behavior. That's a little frustrating. We're usually looking for increases or decreases. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about types of consequence. Manipulating consequences is typically something that we do to change behavior. Again, part of the data sheet that we'll review has many antecedents and consequences that are common that we track and we use to determine the function of the behavior. So something that happens after behavior, something good can happen. So you can play your lotto numbers and then you win the lotto. That's a consequence. Or if you touch your head, you might get a cookie. Getting the cookie is the consequence. It's something good. Something aversive can stop. So for example, if the alarm is buzzing and that's aversive and you hit the button, then the alarm stops. Your child could stop screaming, and first you pick them up, then the child stops screaming. So not always a good thing, but it's very common. It happens. Something bad can happen, or something aversive can happen. And so the behavior could be running, and then you can trip and fall. And that would be something bad happening after the behavior. And then something good can stop. So it gets a little confusing when we talk about these 4 variables of consequences. But basically, it's talking about adding or removing positive or negative consequences. And the way to figure out what's happening is by looking at the behavior. Okay, so how is the ABC analysis useful in behavior change? The way we look at the data is that it tracks patterns in behaviors, and that gives us a good indicator of, is there a specific time of day that the behavior is occurring? Is it a specific activity or specific people that these behaviors occur in? If we flip real fast and look at the sheet here, It has the date and the time and the initials of the person. So these are all things that we track because, again, time of day is important. We list the target behaviors that we're tracking. Hopefully you don't have more than, say, 6. That would be a lot. Location or environment is something that we note. It's not essential to the analysis, but sometimes it is. We note, is it in the classroom? Is it on the playground? Is it in the bedroom? Or is it in the kitchen, for example, at home? Or the car? We note kind of the activity that the child or person is engaging in at the time. So is it just a general activity? Is it just downtime? And then we go into our antecedents and consequences. So when you're filling out a form like this, you're going to start at the top and put in the date, the time, your initials. You're going to check off which behavior occurred. They would be listed here. You're going to check off what location it was, what activity was going on, and then you read your list of antecedents and you would check one antecedent, and then you'd read your consequences and check one consequence. We ask that you only check one for each behavior because typically it should be the thing that immediately occurred before or after, and that should just be one thing. If you check more than one thing, it can get confusing to kind of tweak out what the function might be. So if multiple behaviors occur, we would ask that you kind of go across and check one column for each behavior. So if it was an episode that had maybe 2 or 3 behaviors at one time, you can kind of tweak those out, or maybe they occurred right after each other. And so you'd hit hitting, and then destroying property, and then inappropriate verbals. And then you'd kind of score each one separately. If it's something like a tantrum that's defined as multiple behaviors occurring at one time, then that would just be listed as tantrum, and you would just check that episode off. So, but again, it really determines on how you define the behaviors, and then as long as you're following the definition of that behavior, your data will come out okay. Okay, so again, that sheet or the analysis tracks patterns and antecedents or consequences. It gives info about the frequency of the behavior because as we go back and look at that data, we can say, oh, okay, this behavior occurred in one day. We'd go back and count the occurrences 10 times. And then if we wanted more in-depth analysis, we can say, wow, 8 out of those 10 times happened between 9 and 11 in the morning. So then we say, oh, what's going on at that time in the morning that might be, setting this person off or affecting the behavior. So all of the information on that data sheet helps us determine the function and helps us determine the interventions. Typically, we ask families or staff to take this data for about a week, maybe a little more, depending on how frequently the behaviors occur. But a week, 7 days is a good amount of time. It gives us a lot of data to summarize and makes the functions come out very clear. If the behaviors are something we call low frequency, and they occur very random, but they could be very intense, it's a little bit harder to kind of track that type of behavior on an ABC sheet. You just have to, you'd still do it the same way, but obviously there'd be less frequency, and so we'd need to spread that week out maybe over 2 weeks or 3 weeks to see if we could get more information on it. Do you guys have any questions so far?
Mom said my son sometimes he have 1 week with good behavior and then the next week it completely different. He changed like 1 week it be fine and then the next week it's different completely.
Yeah, so I think doing this type of analysis for a longer period of time, can kind of help us see, is there something occurring, specifically once we start to tweak out the behavior, we can look to see if there's something specifically, is there a change in his sleep patterns maybe, is it the weather, there's all these kind of other variables that can affect behavior. But I think by extending the data and saying, okay, this week, look, we showed really no behavior, this next week, high behavior, the next week, low behavior. Sometimes behavior can be cyclical. It's just indicative that maybe there is additional diagnoses involved or things like that that haven't possibly been identified yet, but the data is the best way to determine and track that. And also when you see kind of patterns in behavior that tend to be cyclical, once the data is summarized into a graph, it's much more clear to see these kind of patterns or spikes. Those are great things to bring to your physicians and show. It's really helpful for them, it's very concrete, and it can help them make effective decisions on other treatment options. So again, we're back to that question, why does he do that? So now we have a little bit more information. We know that there's 4 main functions for behavior. This is for anybody's behavior, your behavior, my behavior, your pet's behavior, just behavior of a living organism. And so the 4 main functions are attention, escape or avoidance, and tangibles, so accessing items or activities, and sensory, so getting that kind of sensory input. All right, so let's start by going over the attention function. Attention is social interaction, closeness, it's eye contact, a tickle, a smile, anything that you do with a person that you're acknowledging them. That's why it's very important for certain procedures. We request that we kind of diminish eye contact when a person's engaging in problem behavior, because even just that looking at them is a form of attention and can inadvertently reinforce the behavior. Something else to understand about attention, do you mind? Thanks. Is that even though you think the attention or the interaction that you're having with the person is unpleasant at the time, it can still be reinforcing to the person. So in other words, you'll hear a lot of the times parents yell at their kids. And you're saying, get down from there, I told you, no climbing. And every time they climb, you just yell at them, and you think it should be like, why is he still climbing? Because I'm yelling at him, you know? But yelling is a form of attention, and if the behavior is maintained by attention, then any type of attention that you give, and we defined attention up here, would make that behavior increase and not decrease. So that's why it's important to do the analysis with the ABC assessment. When you look at the data and you start to see patterns in the responses that you're picking, in the antecedents or the consequences, then that will tweak out what the function is. Once you know the function, then we pick an appropriate procedure and an appropriate replacement behavior for that person to match the function. So a lot of the times you'll see just kids in general have a lot of attention-maintained behavior. And so giving them verbal reprimands is a form of attention. And typically, it might decrease the behavior in the moment, but if the behavior occurs continually over time, then you should realize that you're continuing to reinforce that behavior, and that's why it's still occurring. So then you would say to yourself, you know what? Verbal reprimands are not an effective procedure to decrease climbing on the sofa. So let me find another way. The next function is escape or avoidance. So escape is when you're already engaged in a task and you're trying to get out of it. Avoidance is a task is coming towards you and you're trying to avoid it. So to stop a current or avoid the start of an unpleasant activity or task. Might not be unpleasant to us, it might be a required task like brushing your teeth, but it's perceived as unpleasant to the person. Again, you will start to see that every time your data indicates a problem behavior occurs if the antecedent is you give an instruction and then the behavior occurs, then that is one way that we say, well, every time I give him instruction, he starts screaming. And we'd say, okay, screaming is then maintained by escape or avoidance. So if, like I said, if the child's jumping on the sofa and you say, hey, get down, and they continue to jump and jump and jump, then we know that jumping is maintained by attention. Because they don't have the verbal skills to say, hey, mom, let's play, or hey, I want a tickle. So they learn to do inappropriate behaviors to get attention. Or they learn that banging their head gets them out of brushing their teeth. Because when you say, okay, it's time to brush your teeth, and then they go bang, 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 you say, all right, you don't have to brush your teeth. So then again, if you're taking this data and you're consistently seeing the same consequences or antecedents come up, then that is defining a clear function. Sometimes children or adults, anyone with some type of delayed communication, can have multiply controlled behavior. So the behavior can be controlled by attention and escape. And so again, your data will show that for you. The next function is called tangibles. And this is basically behavior that is used to gain access to items or activities. We see a lot of problem behavior occurring around access to food, preferred snacks. A lot of children on the spectrum can become very aggressive if they don't get the food or snacks that they want. And as they get older, they get much bigger because they're getting access to all of this snack food, and parents have to put locks on refrigerators or locks on cabinets. And it makes life really hard for the family. So I've worked with older children or older teens and adults on the spectrum in their 20s that have had many years of, aggression towards getting access to food, and it can become, a struggle to change. It's definitely not impossible, but it's good to kind of address these behaviors as young as possible. The longer the history with the behavior, the harder it is to change. So tangible can also be really anything that the person wants. So toys, games, the iPad. It can be a particular activity that you do with them. If they come to you and make some type of request and you deny that, then they have a behavior, then that indicates that they're trying to access something. Okay, the last function is called sensory. And sensory behaviors are internal sensations that the person receives in response to sensory input. So it can be rocking, spinning, head hitting, mouthing. Those are all types of sensory behaviors. A lot of children with autism they do hand flapping, they do rocking, they do spinning. They might twirl toys to give visual stimulation. They might look at lights or push on their eyes. I mean, there's many sensory behaviors that are out there. Stimulatory behaviors can be also used to gain access to a sensation that they enjoy. So if they're bored, they might rock just to get some type of sensation. Or it could be that, if they have a headache, they start head banging or hitting their head to try and relieve that pain. So again, something that we do is especially with sensory type behaviors, we also get them checked out to see if there's any medical cause. We want to make sure if you see your child is consistently banging their ear, the first step should be taking them to the doctor to make sure they don't have an ear infection. If the doctor says, okay, no, the ears are fine, then we want to specifically tweak out what was the function of banging on the ear. Sensory behaviors are typically harder to change because they serve an internal function for the person. And when we're looking at changing behaviors, we always try to find a replacement or another way that the person can receive that same input or access. Some sensory behaviors can be hard to replace. But an example would be if a child is always mouthing toys or mouthing their hands, we would want to find something more appropriate that they could mouth. So we would give them like a chewy tube or something like that. That anytime they needed to get that sensory input, then we could give them access to that chewy tube.
I noticed like that my son who's jumping, he flapped his hand when he doesn't have think his way.
Mm-hmm. When he's what?
He doesn't have think his way.
Mm-hmm.
If he's supposed to do something and then he doesn't want to do it. Or if he still want to be on an activity, he's supposed to go to another, then he gets mad, he jumping.
And flap.
And then he's screaming,
Mm-hmm.
that time.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's serving a purpose for him. I mean, in that case, it's a behavior that he's kind of using to display his frustration or a displeasure. We can change that into doing something else, So instead of, basically, we would have to teach him to be okay with hearing the word no. Like, no, you can't have that now. Or no, it's time to stop. We have to finish. And so there are procedures that we would do before we approached him to kind of help him tolerate that process so that he wouldn't have to engage in the flapping and the screaming. But sometimes we just...
That's hard because it doesn't meet with his approval.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, you try to find something middle of the road,
Mm-hmm.
but it's something that he's genuinely not interested, he's just gonna continue to carry on.
Right.
Almost to the point where he'll be inconsolable, you know, having a fit.
Yeah. So, and those kind of behaviors, it's a process to change. I mean, it definitely can be decreased, and we can decrease it to near zero rates, or we can replace it to a different type of response. But there's that learning process, is that, okay, something is going to be removed from me, right? If you're taking or ending a preferred activity, or you're taking away a toy, or you're just denying more, say they want more cookies and you say, no, no more. You know, it's a process of going through, yes, they're going to have that reaction, but as long as you're consistent in how you approach the person, and we put in procedures to help them understand, like maybe we give them a visual or we give them a countdown, and we continue to do that and do that and do that, the person does acclimate to that learning setting. And they learn that when mom comes to me with my 3, 2, 1 countdown, I'm going to have this for a little bit more, and then it's going to go away. And we might keep it for just away from them for just a short time, and then we might give it back to them. And so they learn, okay, it's going to be taken away, but I can have access to it again. And so we do that over and over, and then we start to increase the amount of time that we're taking it away, and as long as they're engaging in appropriate behavior after we remove it, you know, so again, it can be changed, but it can be a tedious process for things like that.
Because the hard thing is when something that you don't expect, like we go to Indiana, and then we have to, something happened in the airplane, so you have to leave.
We wanted to get back on,
And he couldn't understand.
why we had to wait.
Right.
It was right there, was like 2.5 hours crying.
He was trying to pull her back onto the jet to get onto the plane.
Crying,
Oh, yeah, it was a
flapping,
scene.
was
Yeah, so, you know, those kinds of unexpected things can be very problematic, and that's where the communication component comes in. And, you know, unfortunately, we learned by experience. You probably wouldn't know that that was going to be a problem unless he has problems with any type of change and transition in general. But those are things that you kind of prep for.
Should you make it clear to them? I mean, sometimes you just don't understand what they're actually understanding, you know, and they're really self-absorbed. They don't care about anyone or anything around them as long as they're getting what they want.
Right.
Okay. Now, is there something that you can do to instill in them that your behavior is totally unacceptable? You're not going to get that. You're not going to get this. Go to your room, and I don't want to hear anything more about it. I mean, you wonder if they actually understand that, but
Well,
it
they
seems like
will.
some people get it more. Like, for example, he acts a lot different around his mother than he does with me. We're not married. He knows that I will not tolerate any type of nonsense, and he just hunkers down. It's like, okay, I'm not going to screw with this guy, right? But it is like he knows who we can mess with and who we can't mess with.
Right, right.
So that's why, you know, you get that feeling. It's like, you know, I'm not listening to your crap. I'm not going to listen to your nonsense because I know what you're up to. You know, so sometimes it's like, as far as behavior goes, you may find that they're just pulling, and then someone interacts and says, "That's it." Like, then it just seems to stop. So, but it's not uniform. I suppose it's not uniform.
Sure, right. It's not uniform, and you know, the reason why the child behaves differently in the presence of one parent versus the other is because of the history of that interaction, right? Just like kids behave differently at school than they do at home in general, whether it's more structure or less structure, or you know, more follow through from a teacher versus a parent, or the opposite. But that's why we see differences in behavior across the board. So it's important that we start to be consistent as a team, whether it's a team of parents or it's teacher and family, when we're talking about changing behavior. Everybody's got to be on the same page. And so mom would have to start following through the procedures that you're doing. The thing is that we have to make sure that the procedures are effective in...
Already what happened, because my husband, my son do whatever they want, because you know, he tried to play with me. I just see him, and he tried to be calm down. And I don't do nothing. But, you know, if you do that, you have consequences that you don't get. You don't have good toy. You know, I like maybe I pizza. I don't want to buy pizza for you. But with my husband, I don't care.
See? So we also have to, again, go back to the function of the behavior, because some things that what parents get to do inadvertently is always maybe necessarily not behavioral, is that we can like punish behavior, or we can kind of squash behavior by saying, that's it, you're done, go to your room. So that's effective in the moment, but again, it's not effective long term, and that's why behavior continues to recur over time. So once
But
we
could it be
understand the
behavior-
function,
Could it be long-term if you continue to do it?
you could, but you're still not necessarily teaching the person a replacement. So what else could that child do instead of tantruming? What we're teaching him is that you just can't tantrum in the presence of dad. We're not teaching him what else can I do instead of tantrum, which is the goal of ABA.
So redirect, replace it. and give
Replace it with
that's-
something more appropriate. Right. So, I mean, in an emergency situation, you're in an airport, he's making a scene, your reaction is, and you have no other procedure is set, then that's probably the most appropriate thing to do if you can. Just nip it in the bud, redirect, and move on. But realize that that needs to become a teaching scenario that we need to start planning for and finding other ways to be in the middle of an activity in the community, suddenly make some type of change, and then teach them what a more appropriate reaction is. So, and you had a question, sorry, or Steve?
Well, I'm just, my husband and I are both teachers, and,
Uh-huh.
and I find that he's coming home really stressed.
Okay.
Like super stressed from socialization, the constant routine, and we keep routine at home, but we're not as strict as the
Right.
classroom, of course.
downtime and all of this too, they need to be a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, there
Oh.
I can't just feel like we're constantly therapizing.
Yeah.
No, I understand, but we're talking about changing problem behavior. So the behavior is impacting the life of the child as well as the family in some way. But go on, okay, so,
Well, no, it's just the question of like the balance.
yeah.
Because does it have to be that routine-oriented school thing when it's awfully young? In
Yeah.
the grade that he's in, the classroom that he's in, I would just think that they would have a little more, but I do carry over a lot
Uh-huh.
into the home, but I can't carry everything. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't have
No,
kids at home either.
I think that ABA is an effective methodology to change behavior. There are many naturalistic types of procedures that are used for teaching that are less structured than something like a discrete trial training for teaching that, if done properly, can be equally effective. They're very good for the child because they're less structured and they're learning in a more natural environment. But tonight we're talking about changing problem behavior that's really impacting the social and academic and life skills of a child as well as their family. Because if you can't take your child to the airport and you like to travel, then that's affecting you. If you can't go to a restaurant because your child can't be around food and doesn't know how to wait, then that's affecting you. And so these are the kind of behaviors we're talking about tonight.
How will that carry over though into the home though, what they're giving us at school?
Well, I mean, tonight we're just talking about behavior. This is really, right, this is a lesson for you as families of how we deal with behavior in general at school. And if you have behaviors at home that you need to deal with, this would kind of be the process that you would follow. So first you would define the behavior, you would identify the behavior, define it, you take some data on it to get the function so you understand why is my child doing this. I can't assess why your child tantrums in the grocery store. I'm not there, right, during the school day. So, yeah. But if you have a bunch of data, then you can share that with the behavior analyst, and then they can more likely lead you in the right direction, or you can figure it out, by the data. So tonight's session is really about giving you some of the tools that we use to change behavior. And again, we're talking about more extreme behavior, so aggression, tantrums, property destruction, self-injurious behavior, non-compliance. Your child won't follow any rules. We're not going to address every rule across the board, but you might pick the 2 rules that they really have to follow, that are most important to you as a family unit.
And every child's different.
Right,
And
exactly.
There's varying degrees of what you're experiencing too. 'Cause my son, when he comes home from school, sometimes he gets really stressed about homework, to the point where it's overwhelming to him. He's very stressed about it. He's very anxious. All he wants to do is get it done. And if he can't really complete it, he looks for help, and he'll want you to do it. Get rid of my problem. But it's not that easy sometimes. So I hear what you're saying there. It's sometimes you really have to pick your battles too.
Right, right. And so just in general, yeah, your child's been in school all day, they're getting different types of therapies, and they come home, it's totally natural to, give them a break and let them relax. And, as long as you feel like you're able to achieve what you need to do as a parent in the evening with their evening routine, then, you don't necessarily need this right now. But if something were to come up later on, if all of a sudden they started refusing to brush their teeth, and brush their teeth is important, then this would be a way that you could figure out how to deal with that. Yeah, right. Yeah, I know. So, but again, as a family unit, you define what is important and impacting your child or you the most at that moment, and you focus on that one thing. It's impossible to focus on everything at one time. And then also it's good because if you pick a smaller, maybe less intense behavior to change, you're building confidence, your child is building compliance, and they learn like, hey, mom and dad are really following through with this now. And when you go to change the next behavior, it's going to be an easier process for you. Because again, you're changing that kind of relational history that they have with you and how you respond to their behaviors. Okay, so getting back to the function, we discussed attention and escape and access to items and sensory behaviors. So if two children are engaging in the same behavior, but they have different functions, should they have the same procedures in their behavior plan? Because procedures are based on functions. So if I'm banging my head to get attention and Lindsay is banging her head to escape a demand, would we have the same types of procedures in our behavior plan? No. No. So again, that's why it's important to understand the function of the behavior, because that drives how we address the behavior in the behavior plan. Once we understand what the function is, that again helps us determine the replacement behaviors. Whenever you're decreasing a behavior, we need to find a more appropriate behavior to teach or increase. So it's really like a balance here. You can't just squish behavior and not teach something else, because lots of other random behaviors are going to pop up. So as you understand the function of head hitting, and we teach, and it's maintained by attention, and we teach an appropriate communication response to gain attention, like a tap on a shoulder, then as learning to tap on the shoulder is reinforced for that child, hitting your head to get your attention will go down. And it kind of just, you'll see the graphs, one will go down and one will go up, and they'll cross until one hits 0 and the other hits 100%. So data is important. It tells us a lot, and it's really actually exciting to see over the course of the behavior change process that problem behavior go down and that replacement behavior go up.
Now, I have a question. Probably don't want to get too ahead here because I know what your topic is, but if you have an individual like Roseanne's son, that he has a very limited skill set, nonverbal, and really doesn't have much interest either, other than maybe an iPad, PC, no TV. You do want to replace these behaviors. Okay, but given the fact that he has such a limited skill set, he can't speak, and you want to replace it with something that's more beneficial to him, especially if it's intellectually stimulating. What do you do? I mean, I know that's not an easy question because you don't know him, and
Right.
every child is different. But that's frustrating. It's like, what does he do? Because he only does like one of three things. And out of those one of three things, it certainly really isn't helping him. If he goes on his iPad or he goes on YouTube, it's just basically watching nonsense. And it drives you crazy. And it's that repetitive thing too, like over and over and over, which is, something silly like soap opera, rolling credits in a soap opera. And he just watches repeatedly.
Yeah.
What do you replace with something like that?
So I mean, that's a
Or
good
even
question.
Barney. I mean, he's 14 years old and he's watching Barney on YouTube. And, so something like that. It's just other than taking the machines out of your house.
Right. Well, that wouldn't necessarily be effective, because I think the point that you're getting at is when you're trying to change behavior and you identify an appropriate replacement behavior, the way to increase behavior is to reinforce it. And so when a person has limited skills and limited language or limited things that they're motivated by, it becomes really hard to change behavior, because without reinforcement to increase that replacement behavior, that problem behavior is not going to go down. So the focus then becomes first on identifying things that are highly motivating to that person, So if it's the iPad, then he only gets access to the iPad for these new behaviors that we've identified that we want to teach. You can't use the iPad for anything else because we want it to become so powerful that he's motivated to get it, and he'll engage in that new behavior to get the iPad, and over time that will decrease that problem behavior. So it's really a manipulation of reinforcement is one of the consequences, right? So by manipulating reinforcement, we change behavior. In the meantime, we obviously can't use the iPad for everything because the child might get satiated on it, or the iPad might get broken and it's not available at some time. So we want to start building other things that could be equally motivating. That can be really hard. Again, it's a process, but it's something that's worthy of spending a lot of time on. You know, if he likes the iPad, we can save the iPad for those highly preferred behaviors that we're trying to change, but maybe there's other little type of video things that are less exciting, but still within that same class of behaviors. He likes videos, he likes watching things, he likes singing maybe, then we can use those to change, you know, more moderate behaviors across the day to reinforce that, you know. But it really is about, you know, identifying what is powerful that person and then how do we use it. So maybe the iPad is for behaviors in the behavior plan, and then maybe, what else did you say he likes? Like computer games?
No,
So,
it's well,
Puzzle, like
puzzles,
puzzles.
yeah.
okay.
iPad to the PC, you know.
it's similar,
But
yeah.
it's similar, and he'll view the same thing.
Right, yeah. So it's a matter of how you manipulate access to those items. If you have a behavior that you want to change and you have multiple reinforcers to choose from, some kids like a lot of things, it is easier to change behavior, but you can also still identify that highly preferred reinforcer or the iPad for the most important behaviors that we're trying to change, and then you have still left all the other reinforcers that they like to use for just general behavior across the day, you know. So I think that's something to look at, is to start to see how you're giving access to the iPad. Is he getting access for appropriate behaviors or inappropriate behaviors? I know when you have a highly preferred item and you give access to it, a lot of the times taking it away causes more problem behavior. So again, that's something, it's a learning process. We teach that, yes, I'm taking it away, and then when you're calm, you can have it back. But you never give it back in the presence of problem behavior. And so again, that's important to understand the function. So it becomes this big process, but once you start to assess and you put the pieces down on paper and you kind of see it, it becomes more clear. So back to replacement behaviors. Replacement behaviors have to match the function. A replacement behavior is an alternative or an alternate desirable behavior that is selected that will now receive positive reinforcement. So instead of reinforcing the problem behavior, we're going to reinforce the replacement behavior. Most children who engage in some form of problem behavior are not using their communication appropriately. And even if they are nonverbal, there's still many ways to teach to communicate. We can teach pictures, signs, gestures. Initially, we want to start with something very simple to make that child successful, and then as the behaviors go down, we can then start to teach more advanced or complex forms of communication. So, selecting a replacement behavior. Again, it has to match the function, and it should be something that's capable of producing the same reinforcer as the problem behavior with relative ease. So what that means is that if a child screams every time you give them an instruction, and screaming has become successful to get out of that, you can't expect the child to now walk across the room, get their communication book, bring it back to you, and give you the break picture, right? That's too much to expect when screaming was pretty easy to get out of doing something. So you have to make the replacement behavior quite easy and accessible. So maybe instead of that whole chain that I just described, maybe the child just has to go like this. And then once they go like this, you say, okay, you don't have to do it. That's pretty easy, and it's, different than screaming. It's more appropriate, but
They continue to scream even though you don't let them have it. You continue to not let them have it, and they still scream every time.
yeah, you have to ride that out. You have to,
For years.
You physically, well, then it's not an effective, right? You know, something is not appropriately aligned in that system. So if they ask for something and you say no, and they scream, and you don't give them access to that, they should learn somewhere over time, okay, mom's not going to give in and give access. If you give access sometime, then you don't give access other time, then they learn that it's a gamble, and they'll keep on screaming until they can maybe try and break you, you know. Okay. Yeah, yeah. So then in that case, we have to do a little bit more on the front end to prepare him and really show him that this is going to happen. Every day we go to school, maybe little visual calendars, and those are interventions we do before a behavior occurs. So they're called antecedent interventions, where we try and manipulate so that the child understands, is more comfortable, can really process. You know, they know they're not going to get out of it. They learn the difference between a day we go to school and a day we don't go to school, you know. And again, it's that process to kind of, you know, it could take a month of doing that before he really does stop screaming, you know. So, and we also have to look at what is he leaving, you know. Is he watching videos and then then having to go to school? So. Oh, okay. So, I mean. Right. Well, we have to. It's too much. So then we have to look at the program. You know, if the demands are too high and, you know, the support is not aligned properly, then, you know, we kind of have to look at that picture.
Just like the beginning of last year for us with January, February, March, then from then on it got really bad.
Yeah, so we can talk after the training, you know, since I did the assessment, we can kind of see what is going on and look at, yeah, well, we can take a second look at that. So again, make sure when you pick a replacement behavior that it's easy for that child to use initially, and then we can make it more complex as the child develops more skills. Or if the child stays at that level, that's also fine. They learn that this gets me out of doing something instead of doing something like screaming. Okay, so now the hard part becomes in reinforcing that replacement behavior. You have to make sure that you are there and ready with your reinforcement so that the child really, again, learns that it's worth my while to engage in this new behavior instead of the older problem behavior. So if you're diligently reinforcing something and the grandparents aren't, or the spouse isn't, or the babysitter isn't, we're not going to see change in behavior. And again, as the kids get older, it gets harder, and it's even more important that everybody's on the same page. So that's why it's essential to do the assessment, and then just pick, you know, make it easy for yourself. Pick one behavior. Get one appropriately aligned replacement behavior. Determine what your reinforcement is going to be and how you're going to use it. And make sure everybody's on the same page. And as long as you're doing that, you will see change in behavior. The more consistent you are, the faster the behavior will change. If the child detects a difference in the change in how people are responding to this new behavior, intermittently mom and dad are doing different things, then the behaviors will maintain over time. We'll kind of see them more stagnant instead of decreasing and increasing like we should. So this is just a little activity in learning to kind of select replacement behaviors. So if a child is hitting aggression, hitting people to escape a demand, what would be an appropriate replacement behavior for hitting? So what else would we want the child to do instead of hit? To learn to get out of doing something, because they're trying to escape demands, so we know they don't want to do it. And over time, they've learned that hitting is a good way to get out of doing things. So what else could we teach that child to do instead of hitting?
Well, you were mentioning hand waving.
Yeah, it could be some type of sign. So, you know, if they can sign, you know, stop or no or, you know, finished or something like that, any, you know, whatever they're capable of doing, how their fine motor skills are. If the kid is verbal, some kids have verbal skills and they just don't use them effectively, then you can teach them to say no or break. And initially you'd have to prompt those behaviors and then reinforce by letting them escape. So it takes a lot of practice, especially for escape behaviors. People tend to get a little frustrated because they're like, but I want him to do this, or he has to do this. And when you're in the behavior change process, you have to reinforce that new behavior, so you basically have to give them that break or let them get out of doing that. You can always go back and re-deliver the instruction again 15 minutes later, but in that teaching scenario, you have to let them escape from it. If a kid is tantruming, to get access to items. So what would be an appropriate replacement behavior for tantrums? So basically, they want something, and you're denying that request. So part of that is teaching the no or the wait response that they just kind of have to learn in that case. Okay, no, you can't have it now because they're tantruming, but when you're calm, you can have access to it. So again, you switch the focus of getting the access to calm behavior and not problem behavior. All right, so inappropriate comments to gain attention. So they're saying silly things or inappropriate things. They could be cursing, and all of a sudden everybody turns around and gives them all this attention. What could we teach them to do instead of making inappropriate comments? It's always going to be communication-based. So, I mean, we could teach them to tap somebody on the shoulder if they're nonverbal. We could teach them to raise their hand if they're in a classroom instead of, so whatever we select.
And if they do understand language, is part of instill in them that they're being disrespectful?
No.
It's not gonna work.
No, it has to be something very concrete. It has to be a behavior that he can do instead of inappropriate comments. Okay? So you could have him just say, excuse me, and anytime he says excuse me, we give him the attention. If he says anything inappropriate, like, hey, you, or something rude, or a curse word, we ignore. And when he says excuse me, then, yeah, did you want something? We immediately give them that attention. For teaching replacement behaviors, for even more severe behaviors, you really can't teach in the moment. It becomes very hard for that person to learn when they're in the middle of a tantrum or when they're in the middle of being aggressive or self-injurious. So we have to set up direct teaching opportunities. We have to identify that replacement behavior, and we want to practice across the day. If example, escape behavior that we're going to teach is, the no or a break sign, then we want to teach them when they're calm in the morning, hey, do you want, maybe they hate Pepsi for some reason, and you say, hey, do you want Pepsi? And then we immediately say, no, and then we say, okay, hey, do you want broccoli? We know they don't like broccoli. No, okay. So we just continually set them up by, offering them things that we know they don't want so that we can teach them no or break, and then we remove it. So that when the scenario comes that they really want something, or we give them a demand and they really don't want to do it, then they go, oh, and then we help them do it, and then we immediately remove that demand. And then with those scenarios over time, then they learn, we see that the sign is getting reinforced and not the problem behavior, and then they'll start to engage in it independently. And that's kind of the shift, So again, changing extreme problem behaviors is a tedious process that does take time. But if you're consistent, and depending on how long the child has the history of that behavior, you will see success. It's worth definitely putting an effort forth to change. Okay, so the next slide talks a little bit, we've already addressed some of this, being consistent, everyone in the house on the same page. But the important part is continue with your data collection. The sheet in the back that we first went over is really just used for 1 week or two. It's for the assessment. But once we know the function of the behavior, we no longer need to take this kind of tedious data. We just go to something more simple, like a tally sheet that can be weekly or it can be set up for the month. But we want to continue to track the instances of the problem behavior as well as the new replacement behaviors and if the child is using them appropriately. So that ongoing data is what we look at as behavior analysts to see if our procedures are being effective. It's really hard to rely on verbal report of parents or teachers or paras. because verbal report is just not very accurate. So people remember things differently sometimes than the way they actually occur. So this sheet is pretty simple. It's actually a weekly sheet. It's broken down into 8-hour time intervals across the day. And that's just, again, because sometimes it's nice to see if behaviors are specifically occurring in a particular time of the day. If it was just a weekly sheet without time, you would just tally it in that day. And then we say, okay, there were 35 instances of inappropriate talking on Monday, you know. But if we do this way with the breakdown, we can say, wow, you know, most of those inappropriate verbal statements are between 8 and 4 when they're at school, and they're not in the morning and they're not in the evening. So then we can specifically look at that environment and what role that might be playing in the problem behavior. Okay, I think. Yep. So that is it for tonight's lesson on decreasing problem behaviors. Do you guys have any questions? Or it was a lot of information. This is definitely a heavy topic, but you know, I think one thing that Lindsay can kind of comment on is you know, how to access services that can help you in the home. And there are behavior analysts that work in the community that can come into your home as well and kind of assist with these types of things. As we focus on the school, then it's good to know that there are additional support services out there for help in the home. So, thank you.
That was great.
Good job. My name is Lindsay Flaxer. I am a social worker in developmental pediatrics at Boston Medical Center. My colleague Sherry King and I have been coming to each of these, first at the Jackson Mann, and we'll continue to come to the ones here at the Curley the next couple months. And so what we really do is support families from time of diagnosis all the way up through transition to adulthood years, and that can look very different at different times. It can look similar in terms of like sort of what we look at to support families, and we sort of see it in a few different domains. And please also feel free, if anyone wants more soda or pizza or anything, feel free to do that before we leave. But we think about it in a few different ways. So public benefits access, so applying and enrolling in the Department of Developmental Services, formerly DMR. We do try to help families apply for that. SSI, if you qualify, so you know, public Social Security support for kids with disabilities. We also look into sort of the community support center domain. DDS funds 7 autism support centers throughout the state. DDS also funds family support centers for kids with a dual diagnosis, and that can offer more respite care and services like that. The autism support centers, if you all live in Boston, yours would be TIL. Is everyone here connected to TIL? You all are. Okay, great. So that's really good. That's definitely something we tell families to get involved in. If anyone applied to the autism waiver, that's a program brokered through DDS. If you happen to get the waiver, congratulations. If you didn't, most people didn't. But there's a wait list, so hopefully you're on that. And another big thing that Sherry and I talked about, sort of focusing on today, which we don't have to if no one's particularly interested, but we created a safety handout for families and sort of like a safety checklist manual. We kind of felt like there's really nothing that you can underscore more than a child's safety, both in school and in the community. So we made some of these, and I can hand these out and talk more about them. But before I do, was there any resource question that you got, that any of you have had? Yeah.
Can you tell me a reason other than financial to apply for or access DDS? Why other than a financial reason?
DDS? So SSI is the support that is straight checks, you know, where they look at your income and they look at your savings in order to write checks. But DDS is need blind for the most part, and what they do is they fund these different support centers so that families can access services. So, you know, for example, Sherry King, my colleague, and I ran something called Teen Talk for 8 weeks last fall for TIL, and it was a free social skills groups for adolescents, and their parents had their own component, learning all about transition issues, guardianship, housing, and you know, those programs can be like $1,000, and we were able to do it with DDS funding. And not just that, it was, we really try to do things in the communities where families live, and that's also what TIL does. So they do parent groups, training, support groups, and they do them all over the city. So, there's a group in Hyde Park, there's a group in East Boston, there are groups for Spanish-speaking families. This spring, we're piloting a group for siblings of kids who have autism with a babysitting component for kids with autism, and then a parent support group as well. So, it's also just to really connect to more and to offer it on a more regular basis. I know TIL does CHAMPS. I don't know if any of you have been involved with that, but it's for kids, and it's sort of like an adaptive physical ed class. So it's really just, helping to access more supports. Some of them are at a low cost, some are at none, but families of all income levels are more than welcome to participate. And it's just sort of, like a centralized place to access support. So,
I think something to add too is that when your child is young, you're kind of bombarded with a lot of services.
Right.
But the service delivery model does really change as your child gets older, and you'll find that there are less and less opportunities for additional services or just access to social activities and things like that that are accepting of the child.
Yeah.
And so these are good resources to kind of get familiar with, even if your child is young right now and it might not seem like you need a lot. But,
Yeah.
just knowing that they're there and understanding how to access them and being familiar with them is good,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
you'll probably have to try some out and see what works for you and your child and what doesn't work. But
Definitely. That's
Yeah.
very true. That's very
Yes,
true.
I know a lot of people say to sign up for DBS, but I just haven't seen any reason to start.
Right.
Interested in seeing what the-
Yeah. And how old is your?
He just turned 3.
He turned 3. Okay. So, TIL, the support center, is funded by DDS. So usually, if families start doing activities through TIL, they'll have you enroll because basically, they get extra funding for each family that gets enrolled. So that's kind of.
I've been in TIL for a year.
Oh, okay.
They never mentioned it.
Oh, okay, yeah, so usually they do, but if in the case that they didn't, the other thing too is, I don't know if you're aware of the autism waiver that came out.
Yeah, I didn't-
You didn't, okay, so, right,
Yeah.
so, which you can also apply for Mass Health Secondary as long,
I do
okay,
What's the autism waiver? I'm familiar with it.
Sure. So
She's her own insured, so.
okay.
But not through SSI.
Okay, so the Autism Waiver is a program run by the Department of Developmental Services for kids who've been diagnosed with autism, really birth through their 9th birthday. And the Autism Waiver gets announced every couple of years, and kids who are on the waiver sort of graduate out the day they turn 9, so there are actually kids on a wait list who can then become part of it. And what it is it's up to $25,000 a year of services, like you don't have to pay for it through your insurance. It's separate from school services. That it's basically, and the money is brokered. Yeah, and so the money is brokered by the Department of Developmental Services, so the family doesn't get the cash, but there's a list. So you can get almost like unlimited ABA services, occupational therapy, durable medical equipment, all sorts of stuff.
get like respite.
Respite care, absolutely. But the challenge is that, a couple thousand families apply and maybe 200 get it, and it's a semi-lottery. That's kind of what they say. So they say it's a lottery, and there is, I think, an income limit of maybe 300% of the federal poverty line.
Is it based on the level of disability of the child too?
No.
They try not to look at that. If a child is eligible for DDS, then they don't look at why that child's eligible per se, as long as they have a diagnosis of ASD. But yeah, so that's a fair question to ask about DDS. And also, when a child becomes, 14 and older, and you really start looking at transition, DDS can be really helpful in helping you get, psychological testing for your child, sort of helping to create a larger picture of what your child is going to be doing when they turn 18 and then 22. Yeah, that's not income-based at all. So, it's kind of one of those things that it's good to be involved in, because once your child's enrolled, they're kind of enrolled for the long haul. When your child turns 18, you apply for adult services. But sort of as they're 15, they're 16, they're 17, and other things are coming up, DDS is a good agency to be involved in, because they'll hopefully give you a case manager who can help navigate that stuff. But yeah, were there any other more general questions about insurance, about getting home therapy? Yes, please.
Yeah, home therapy.
Okay.
So the Erica bill,
Yes.
I mentioned that a lot in our IEP meetings.
this
so-
is why, like, I pushed so hard for more ABA in the school.
Sure.
Because we have a $4,000 deductible
Okay.
on insurance. He does have Mass Health.
Okay,
as
that's-
a secondary,
Which,
so they cover completely different, we have Tufts, so they're like, oh, well, we'll cover this, but we won't cover that. We won't back up that, but we'll back up this.
Yep.
And then they don't meet.
do you? Okay.
So I don't know how to get them on the same page and not
Sure.
charge us the 4,000, which we can't even do.
Absolutely, no, it's a high deductible. So one thing, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, it's called premium assistance through Mass. You have premium assistance. So that should be helping to kick in with that overhead that you're talking about. So something else you can look into through Mass Health is their CBHI services. So in-home therapy, in-home behavioral therapy, intensive care coordination, or all these different services under Mass Health's behavioral health service. And so in-home behavioral therapy is not something you can refer to directly, but there are things called hub services. So either ICC or in-home therapy. And your in-home therapist can refer for in-home behavioral, which is up to 5 hours a week at home with a behavioralist, like maybe a direct provider, and then they're supervised by a BCBA, someone like Lorraine. And even though it's not like ABA necessarily in terms of like how a school would write it up, these people are trained the same way. And if your child is on the autism spectrum, they're still using these same principles because that's what's scientifically proven to work.
So do I have to go through Tufts first?
No, you go through Mass Health.
Well, Mass Health told me that I could get, what is it? The big one. The one that used to teach all the kids with autism.
Beacon,
The one that used to teach them all before
HMEA,
they
RCS.
allowed them in schools.
oh, early intervention? No.
You mean the NEC, New England Center, or a May, or a Melmark, or?
The big one.
Not RCS, not Beacon,
Yeah, NEC is the biggest.
not HMEA.
New England Center for Children?
Oh, my God, why can't I think of it?
I have Tufts too, and I get ABA through them, and then Mass Health will pay the co-payments.
Yeah, that's
That's
premium
a new
assistance.
thing.
That's
No, not different from premium assistance, but,
Premium assistance pays for Logan's.
yeah, different from
portion of
premium
Tufts.
assistance, but I have Tufts and I get ABA at home. And they pay for the co-payments now. It's a brand new thing they do.
Through,
And the Mass Health, I have Tufts
NEC
regular.
is building blocks, isn't it? Isn't building blocks building? No.
Building
have
blocks
Beacon.
is, usually they work with.
Time-based,
yeah.
I mean, they do some ABA, but it's not hardcore ABA.
Yeah, it's a little bit
I
different.
go through Beacon, but I get it through Tufts, and then I don't pay the co-payment anymore.
Okay.
So yeah, you can look into that. I know there have been some recent insurance changes with early intervention as well as, I guess, on the larger scale. But you can also get in-home behavioral therapy.
So I can just go through Mass.
Yeah, and you can call and you can self-refer. So you can call and say, I'd like IHT, in-home therapy, and there's a bunch of different agencies that if you have MBHP or whichever neighborhood health plan, whoever your managed care provider is, they have a list. So you call them, make an in-home therapy referral yourself, have his pediatrician do it, anyone you want really, and say specifically, I'm hoping to have this as a hub service to get in-home behavioral therapy. And then they'll make a referral to the behavior-specific agency, which can, like I said, come to your house 5 hours a week, up to 7 hours a week, supervised by a board-certified behavior analyst. So that's a way to get additional services, not even having to use Tufts, but if that can work for you, then you could even do both.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
I don't like what Tufts offers.
Okay. So yeah, that's always a really nice thing if your child has Mass Health as their secondary or as their only insurance. Any of the Child Behavioral Health Initiative services, you can go for it.
But will they cover any speech therapy?
So that
That's not
if you're using Mass Health, you can go to your pediatrician or developmental pediatrician and get a letter of medical necessity. Places like Spalding will cover speech, will take Mass Health for speech therapy. South Shore Hospital. You do it at Faulkner, and is it with a Mass Health product?
She's her own self.
Oh, so she's self-insured.
Four funds.
Oh, okay.
So she's foster adopt, so she has Medicaid till she's 21.
Oh, okay.
So, but because of that, we access her OT is through Braintree Rehab.
Great,
Yeah,
okay.
And her speech is down at the Faulkner. But to find them was like.
Yeah. The May Institute.
Yeah. And then it took 8 months on a wait list to
Yeah.
get the first appointment. So
Yeah.
it's not like you can get services tomorrow on Mass Health or anywhere else.
No, not
But
necessarily.
She also has diagnoses that cover that. It's not her ASD that covers it.
Okay.
She's communication disorder, auditory processing.
Okay. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's
So-
how they bill under it, is if they bill under her communication disorder, not ASD.
Sure. Okay. Were there any other questions, specific stuff? Insurance, DDS, SSI, community support agencies?
My big thing
Yeah.
is the social skills piece.
Okay.
That's what we're struggling with, and we're struggling with it. She's in an integrated setting. They're putting in some social skills curriculum through one of the MGH programs I have over at the Haley.
Youth
I'm
care,
sure
maybe?
you guys know about kind of what they're doing over there. Maybe you don't.
At where?
At the Haley, what they're putting in
Oh.
is through MGH. It's not the Laurie Center, but it's.
Is it youth care?
I believe so.
Okay, yeah, they do great social skills groups.
It is, but it's twice a month. And
Which-
so you get twice a month, which is not going to do anything when you're 6, when you're struggling on a daily basis while your friends are excluding you.
Right.
Because, and then your social issues. So the hard part is that how you get, as you get older, the more ostracized you get because of your inability to access social scenarios in an effective manner, and your communication skills are lacking, and your pragmatics are so low. And so how do you navigate that without being completely ostracized on a daily basis? That's the issue that I guess we're at right now. So that spans more than this, but that's.
Sure. No, it's a really fair thing that you bring up. Part of it definitely has to do with, setting really strong and sort of measurable goals on an IEP. So, having a school adjustment counselor, do some stuff, having speech therapists, be a part of that.
She can qualify for speech therapy under their guise, even though she's a communication disorder. So, I mean, I'm so frustrated with it.
Really?
No, it's not just, it's just,
Yeah.
we've been at it for 12 months, and I still can't sign off on it.
And so,
Not that it's tough, they're just not delivering services.
so part of it too can be looking into, if you're involved with TIL, the Autism Support Center, they've really ramped up their social skills programming, and they're actually doing something for teens right now. For, I believe it's 13 to 18-year-olds are going to Harvard to do like an inclusion program once a week for the next couple months, and they do like games and a pizza night, and it's on like a weekend. So, they're really trying to consider that as a bigger focus of what they do, doing more direct service and not just parent support and training, but also really focusing on, social skills and pragmatics and independent living skills. And the Garrett Presley Center and I don't know if they're in Mattapan or Hyde Park, they focus on 12 and up. They also do a lot of social skills programming. For the littler kids, Champs at TIL, it is adaptive phys ed, but it's also a social skills piece. They do swim lessons. And then, some families have found even their own kind of like from going to a parent support group, they'll kind of create social opportunities for their kids, but that's definitely tough. And ideally, you'll be able to, work with your school too to foster some of that.
If you are able to identify, 3 or 4 really strong social goals that everyone's going to focus
Yeah.
on, and you can start to access some of the community services, so a therapist is coming to the home, and then they can, get her involved in, generalizing those skills that she's learning in school if you get her into a dance class, and then they go with her consistently, or, or a play group, or a church group, or something where, you expose her to, 2 or 3 kids consistently that she can practice these skills with over time. But it does take a lot to set up and kind of implement.
I feel like it's in our IEPs, though, that the teachers are supposed to be doing this. They did go to schools with
Well,
special
for sure,
needs,
and I think they do
Yeah.
focus on social,
I don't think they get that 100 or so hours a week that we're supposed to be getting.
Right, but if you're looking for something like very intensive and very specific, I mean, a lot of ABA is used to teach social skills, and a lot of the goals are written to work with the child during center time and those times where playtime, playground time or things like that, when they can really get in there with the other kids and foster that.
That's why it's great.
But it takes
When you
like,
can get it.
time every day to do that.
ABA, so
And you still need to generalize that to the other setting, right? So, you would want to have some carry through where your child is exposed to some, extracurricular activity, or you have one little friend come over after school and you kind of facilitate that same thing for that generalization component. It's important, But, that time in the day is a small part of everything else that the kid needs to learn as well. So there's readiness skills, there's academic skills, and, it's you determine what you want the focus to be for sure out of your child's IEP, but, and then you try and build the support services around that. So if social skills are the focus, ABA is working on it, speech is working on it, teacher is working on it. I mean, OT also can work on it in small groups.
Yeah.
Anytime your child is in a small group, those are social opportunities to reinforce and work on.
Yeah.
I guess the answer is you just have to keep pushing and get more and more and more.
Pushing, and you have to monitor. I mean, is what you're doing effective? You know, I mean, why keep doing something for 4 months if it's not proving to be effective? That's why data is important. You know, is it an implementation problem? Is it a procedure problem? You know, is the goal too big? Do we need to scale back some? Maybe they're missing a prerequisite skill. So, I mean, the details of behavior analysis are all about, you know, getting a global picture of where the child is and then determining what skills, those small little broken down skills they need to build up to be successful. And so sometimes goals are selected, not always using effective tools, and you could have goals that the child's really not ready for, so they're going to struggle, they're not going to be successful.
Yeah. And you know, ideally, YMCA's rec departments, some of these like city-run library programs, with the correct supervision, you know, a lot of kids on the autism spectrum, at least that I've worked with, have done surprisingly well when given the opportunity to try in these settings. You know, sometimes parents are like, I don't know if he's going to be able to handle like the musical class over at the library, and then they do great. You know, and some of that, and a lot of it's free or low cost or, you know, whatever it is. Or, you know, maybe they're the only child, you know, with autism in the group, but, you know, it's a welcoming group of kids. And if parents are involved, like a lot of kids have a lot of success, not necessarily just doing autism specific stuff, if you want to give it a try. And if it doesn't work, then that's okay too. And so these are our safety packets. They have applications for handicap placards. If you have a child with autism and a car, you can get a handicap placard. Yay! You can apply for a handicap placard on your car so that your child doesn't have to walk through parking lots. As long as your pediatrician or other doctor signs off on it, you can get one. So it's a safety issue, but a lot of families have one. I also put in the brochures for Medical Alert and LoJack. So Medical Alert are bracelets that a child can wear that just kind of list the diagnosis and an emergency phone number if they get lost. And a LoJack bracelet has not GPS. It has radio frequency tracking in it. Also, if a child is a bolter, runs. Yeah.
Really?
And we also at BMC created a safety handout to talk about water safety, safety in the home, teaching some impulse control skills, different tips for just making your home safer, and more information about medical bracelets and everything. So please feel free to take one of these. Call me anytime, email, and come back if you want. We'd love to have you next time.